fella. He's lost so much weight. The self-harm is unbelievable. He cannot cope with prison. This is not just about mental illness. He cannot cope in there. And because he's on constant watch because of the self-harm, he's literally sat behind a cage like an animal. When they walk past and point and laugh at him. How is that humane? He just gets in 4 weeks till parole. It's like, yes, you know, you can do this. Get knocked back, you know, we can, you know, keep fighting. You can do it, you're strong. And I know he's got the plan to go listen if he don't get what he needs. If he doesn't get released, then now I can just see it.
Well, I'm joined now by former prisoner and campaigner Sean Atwood. Good afternoon to you, Sean Atwood. 11 years in jail for a 10-month sentence. What impact would that have on somebody?
The psychological terror of never knowing when you're getting out is overwhelming. It pushed me to the brink of suicidal madness. My 26 months on remand, I was told I was facing a maximum 200-year sentence for non-violent drug offences in Arizona, and I was about ready to slash my wrist. Not making excuses for my crimes, but it's just never knowing when you're getting out, never knowing when you're going to get your life back. One of the happiest days of my life was when I was sentenced to 9.5 years, because I could see the exact time I was going to get out.
Yeah, you had some kind of certainty, so you've got the psychological implications, but also the implications on the prison population.
The prisoners are against it, the guards are against it, the prison governors are against it. They can't give these guys the programs to reintegrate into community because they don't know when they're going to get out. So how can they safely transition them to become productive members of society? The prisoners in there who know they're going to get out, they're the ones getting the programs, and it's causing resentment from the prisoners who are on the IPPs.
So what is the solution then, Sean Atwood?
Instead of leaving all of these guys trapped in a kind of purgatory, they need to have sentences that are converted to normal sentences. They've done the crime, yes, they've done the time, they need to get out. So these tariffs need to go, and they need to be converted into normal sentences. They need to be given the programs to reintegrate into society, and they need to be allowed out. This is costing the taxpayers $200 million a year almost to house 4,000 plus prisoners, many of whom have gone past their tariffs.
Yeah, I mean, Michael Gove has been speaking about this, former Justice Secretary. He's proposing that executive clemency be granted to some of those who are on these IPPs. But, I mean, who's going to take that decision? It would be a very brave and risky decision, politically very unpopular. I mean, imagine if an offender were to re-offend.
Very unpopular because it was designed for dangerous offenders and sex offenders, but the most dangerous offenders are doing mandatory or discretionary life sentences. Under IPP now, you've got people in there for shoplifting, you've got people in there for less than £20 of criminal damage. I don't think there's much risk in granting clemency to some of these low-level offenders. So
the IPP system has been used for prisons that it wasn't designed for in the first place?
And even the government scrapped it, so it says it all right there, but leaving these guys trapped is most unfair.
I mean, when we look at the state of prisons at the moment, this month alone we've had the riot at Bedford Prison. We've had stories of prisoners being locked in their cells for 23 hours a day. Then in the last week or so we've had images on social media of prisoners enjoying takeaways, fish and chips, steak, posting photos that they've taken on illegal mobile phones. And Liz Truss insists that she is not out of her depth. What do you think?
It's disintegrating into complete and utter chaos. And I saw this in America. The state system was run down, and then they come in with the solution, which is the privatisation. So I think that's the way it's being shaped up.
So where do you see any improvement coming?
The Justice Minister needs to look at the whole situation and put the resources and make prisons house people who are dangerous to society. Most prisoners are low-level drug users, people with addiction issues, the mentally ill. All these people could be referred over to the health services. Prisons need to go back to being housing people who are hurting other people. Low-level drug offenders are hurting themselves. So you could save all this money by transferring those over to health and letting prisons get on with what they should be.
Yeah, I mean, is this an issue of resourcing, though? Because that's going to be a problem across the board, isn't it? Whichever sector you're looking at.
It is going to be an issue, absolutely, but young people with addiction issues, the mentally ill, people getting busted with low levels of drugs for personal use. Should the taxpayers be spending more than it costs to send a young person to the top independent school in this country to house that person in the prison for a year? It's an absolute waste of taxpayers' money.
OK, Sean Atwood, thanks very much indeed for talking to us this afternoon.
You're welcome.
Men and women serving short tariff IPP sentences for, in the wider spectrum, low-level offences are now serving longer than IRA terrorists convicted of mass murder. There has been no justice for Danny Weatherspoon, given a 13-month tariff at 19 years old, then cut his own throat after 8 years of post-tariff IPP misery and hell. Miraculously, Danny survived. Danny's despair is yet another sad, depressing, alarming miscarriage of justice. The campaign groups and mainstream journalists must catapult these alarming individual miscarriage of justice into the highest profile, most talked about cases in the land. This must happen quickly because otherwise people will die. Self-inflicted IPP death figures are frightening. The manner in which post-terror despair-riddled IPPs are dying is a crime against humanity. Bleeding to death by self-inflicted razor blade wounds or choking to death by hanging from the bars in our cold, draconian Victorian prison cells. An epic, shameful stain on the British justice system. How long is the Justice Secretary prepared to allow this carnage to carry on?
Danny Weatherson, 16-month tariff, cut his throat after 9 years, suffering catastrophic mental health breakdown. Time served to date, 13 years. Parole date, 9th of May 2019. I am pleading with you. I am pleading with you to end their suffering. I am pleading with you to end this massacre. I am pleading with you to end the suffering and the bloodshed. I am pleading with you to end the suffering inflicted upon these innocent family members. If you do not and will not, then I am going to spearhead the biggest and greatest campaign in global criminal justice history. I will swarm your capital city with activists. I will flood your nation's cities with a new breed of modern-day activism never seen before. I shall engage you with a level of new breed deep web digital activism that shall shake your corridors of power. I will electrify 15 million living in poverty, abandoned by your government, as well as the 2 million using food banks and the 320,000 street homeless. We shall unite in an unbreakable bond of togetherness and unity. For in the words and wisdom of Dr. Martin Luther King, freedom has not, is not, and will never be free. Freedom must be and will be demanded by the oppressed. We will suffer in silence no more. Our attack will be swift as the wind. We shall march calm like the forest, in defense as a mountain rests firm, like darkness impenetrable to the enemy. My movements shall be swift like the lightning, and for as long as the honey-seeking bees shall align with the celestial sun, justice will be done, and justice will be seen to be done. I'm Pepsi Watson. This is Watson at Westminster for Crime and Justice TV.
This is Crime and Justice TV, the Pepsi Watson podcast, Modern Thinkers. Pepsi Watson, Crime and Justice TV, broadcasting today on Thursday the 16th of May 2019. This is Crime and Justice TV. So today this is a podcast about the IPP sentence and about the plight of an IPP prisoner by the name of James Lawrence. The IPP sentence was implemented into the Criminal Justice Act in 2003 by the new Labour Blair government, specifically Jack Straw, David Blunkett and Tony Blair. The IPP sentence has been a catastrophic failure of policy, resulting in a mass self-harming amongst the current IPP population and major loss of life. There's now been 140 deaths and suicides attributed to the IPP sentence, as IPP prisoners suffer and endure catastrophic breakdown in mental functioning and delirium as they struggle to cope with the despair and hopelessness of their post-tariff IPP predicament. Between the time of the implementation of the sentence, when the Crown Court judges in England and Wales started to give the sentence out in April 2005, and November 2012, when the sentence was banned by LASBO after a landmark Strasbourg ruling, which ruled the IPP sentence arbitrary, illegal and inhumane. Over 6,000 IPP sentences were given out in courts in England and Wales. The Parole Board, under massive pressure from The Guardian, penal reform organisations, law lords, Panorama, Victoria, Derbyshire, etc., and IPP families are and have been over the past 2 or 3 years trying to drip feed these IPPs out into the community, but it's not doing anything to stop the bloodshed or the suffering to the IPPs in question or all the families of the IPPs. So we're now at a point where we have near 2,500 IPPs detained indefinitely with no right to release, serving 99-year IPP life sentences in England and Wales. Over 90% of these have served their tariff or minimum term, and near 70% of this population are self-harming in what can only be described as a bloody massacre. The current Justice Secretary David Gauke and former Prisons Minister Rory Stewart and Attorney General Jeremy Wright are categorical and have been categorical when they've met family members at Westminster of IPPs that they will not be passing the necessary legislation that will stop the bloodshed and stop the suffering. So now we're at a situation where we have short tariff IPP prisoners who receive tariffs of only a few months or maybe a couple of years, who have now been detained for 12, 13, 14 years for what can be described in the wider spectrum as low-level offences. So, for example, we have Danny Weatherson up in HMP Northumberland, who received a 16-month tariff for the attempted robbery of a coat, who's now been detained for 13 years. We have James Ward, who had a 10-month tariff, who's appeared on Panorama and Victoria, Derbyshire, who set fire to a prison mattress, who's now been detained for 13 years, and he's currently up in the segregation unit, suffering really badly and immeasurably up in HMP Gartree. We also have Wayne Bell, who has appeared on the BBC News recently, who was sentenced to an IPP with a 4-year tariff for the robbery of a push bike, a pedal cycle. He's now been detained for 12 and a half years and has just tried to commit suicide, and he's refusing to talk to family, friends, prison officials, and he is suffering immeasurably. He's weak, grey, gaunt and very skinny. And he's just completely given up hope. At the same time, despite the fact that these men, a lot of these men who were, teenagers when they got sentenced and are now 30, been locked away 13 years on this barbaric, dehumanising and cruel IPP sentence. You've got the parents and families of these short tariff IPPs are observing serial rapists and child rapists being released from prison after only 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years. And this is a big thing that contributes to deteriorating mental health of IPPs as they observe these really serious offenders being released from custody for much worse crimes than they were sentenced for, and it kind of destroys the faith in the criminal justice system for the IPP families. So today we've got a lady by the name of Mandy Lawrence. Mandy Lawrence is the mother of an IPP prisoner by the name of James Lawrence. James Lawrence received an 8-month tariff IPP sentence in 2006 for possession of an imitation starting pistol. James Lawrence served 9 years and then was released in 2015. He was then recalled on a charge which then led to no further action, so was subsequently and quite rightly re-released in 2016. He was then rearrested for another charge, which he was then found not guilty of. But despite the fact he was found not guilty, he's been detained subject to the IPP life licence for a further 2.5 years and remains detained indefinitely subject to the IPP sentence with no right to be released, and has to go through rigorous risk assessment with the parole board in order to get released. James is currently detained, so he's now done sort of 12, 13 years. We've got Mandy Lawrence here, so I'm going to introduce Mandy. If you could just tell us, Mandy, about James when he first got the IPP sentence. I know at the time in 2006, I'm an IPP myself, and we didn't really understand what the IPP sentence was. They were just handing it out all over the country at the rate of over 100 a month. Crown Court judges didn't even know what the sentence was. They were bringing people back to explain it to them after sentencing hearings. So if you could just introduce yourself and tell us a bit about James. I know he was very young when he first got the IPP sentence, but what it was like for you and James around the time, 2006, when he received this horrendous IPP sentence.
Yeah, well, we really didn't understand what it was.
Mm-hmm.
Except the judge made a mistake. He had a common assault charge as well.
Yeah.
And he also gave him an IPP for that. So the barrister took it back into court an hour later, and the judge had to take it off, and he didn't even know what he was doing, basically. So I just thought James would do 8 months or a year or 2 years, and then he'd be released. So it wasn't until he started his sentence and I began to look into it a bit more, and it was just horrific. Horrific as a young lad of 19 who had this imitation starting pistol on him, and he had it purely because in October 2005 he was stabbed and left for dead. And so after that, it was horrific injuries. He had massive operation, but he said to me, the fear, what he wanted to carry something. He had no intention of doing anything with it, but stupidly, it's what he did. He was 19 and then has ended up with this horrific sentence. Constantly, year after year, parole after parole, denying, just constantly on and on and on for years. So it's affected his family. My mum and dad never saw him again because they have both died while he's been in custody. It just affects a lot more than people realise. It's not, if my son was a murderer, if he was a serial rapist, I'd understand an IPP.
Yeah.
He was just a stupid 19-year-old boy who got in with the wrong people, who has, he had his own mind, but after that happened to him, he had carried this thing. None of us knew till he got caught with it. So really, it's affected a lot of things, a lot of his life, you know, and how he's held himself together until recently, I don't know. I really don't know. But he's struggling with mental health now.
So you're saying at the time of when he got the IPP, as a, you know, you and him as a family, you didn't understand the severity of it, and as the kind of time went on and you looked into it and researched it, it kind of dawned on you the severity and the seriousness, you know, that this was, you know, in essence a life sentence, a 99-year sentence, and then and then you and James then endured, you know, kind of multiple back-to-back 2-year parole knockbacks. What was that like for you, you know, to the experience of, you know, constantly receiving these 2-year parole knockbacks? What was that like for you, and what was that like for James?
Quite horrible, really, because I think he built his hopes up a bit and then thought, oh yeah, I'll get out. And I thought, well, he's got to get out now. He's been there for years. But what was also happening was, as you would be aware, fake security information is used a lot, made up fake, you know, not proved, etc. That kept happening to him. You know, and then so obviously the parole board then don't want to release you.
No.
So you're just, you know, you're stuck.
What was happening around about that time, Mandy? Because, like I said, I'm an IPP myself, and in the early days, you know, what happened was the prisons, the parole board, the probation service, they never coped with the devastating influx of over 6,000 IPPs in a 7-year period, and the majority of those that came into the prison estate, which was already overflowing and overpopulated, the majority of those sentences were given out between the years of kind of 2006 and 2008 or 9. So you already had, by 2009, 2010, you already had like over 4,500 IPPs. So we were all languishing in BCAT locals, and our tariff came and went and passed, and we'd never been given any kind of sentence plan. And IPPs, you know, even up until this date, we've never had anything that even resembles a sentence plan, because normally, under normal circumstances, when somebody is sentenced to life with the old discretionary life sentence or a mandatory life sentence for murder, you know, they'll do a bit of time, maybe a year in a BCAT local remand prison, and then they'll be shipped off to first stage lifers units, where they will have comprehensive and detailed sentence plans orchestrated by, you know, a well-run lifer team, and they will have goals and targets. But IPPs, because the implementation of the sentence was so reckless, knee-jerk, and just, you know, without any thought, and everybody told them not to do it. Everybody in criminal justice told Tony Blair not to do it, but he did it anyway, he used IPP as a political weapon to gain votes and secure election victories. And it was kind of a consequence of this kind of post-Bulger, post-Sarah Payne, you know, dangerousness renaissance era where Tony Blair and the new Labour Blair government had politicised law and order, and they used IPP for political gain, and the consequences, you know, like we discussed earlier, of being, you know, 140 deaths. IPPs are killing themselves all over England and Wales. They've been detained for years and years and years and years with no hope. And you know, you said, James, you don't know how he's done it. I mean, he's done well to just keep hold of his, you know, mental health and stay well and stuff. But what happened, my original point, at that time, 2006, 2007, 2008, our tariffs were coming up. So James, your son, had this silly 8-month tariff. I mean, that's come and gone in the blink of an eye, and he hasn't had a parole hearing. Now, the law states that you, as a life sentence prisoner, as an indeterminate sentence prisoner, you must receive a parole hearing at the tariff expiry and no later than that. And there's been successful legal challenges which have resulted in compensation for life sentence prisoners who do not get their parole hearing at the tariff expiry. Now, what happened with IPPs with these short tariffs, like your son, 8-month tariff, you know, we never got a first parole hearing for ages after that. So for me, my tariff was 1 year, 10 months. I waited 3 years for my first parole hearing. And then when I had that parole hearing in 2009, you know, they took me into this dark corner of a dim lit prison at HMP Wayland. I had nobody told me I was going to face a parole hearing. It was just sort of make it up as you go along. They hauled me into this room. A 3-member panel ripped me apart for 4 hours. I had no solicitor. And then they were just shoving 2-year knockbacks under our doors on a bit of paper. I mean, they weren't even calling us to the office. And that's kind of when, as IPPs, you know, we started to realise the severity of the sentence in the sense that, you know, they're just going to keep us in here for years and there's nothing they could do. And, you know, what they did with James and me, you mentioned, like, you know, over the few parole board knockbacks, he started to give up hope. Now, the reason he gave up hope is because what they did with us, they would say, you've got to do A, B, and C, and then you can go home. So we do A, B, and C. We do a cognitive behavioural course. We do a victim awareness course. We'd get on enhanced, be well behaved, and then we'd come up for parole. They'd knock us back for 2 years and say you've got to do D, E, and F. They'd constantly change the goalposts. Yeah. And we could just never get out. We just could not get out. It didn't matter what we did, no matter how good we were. And this is a very interesting point, Mandy, and what a lot of people don't realise. Yes, there are some IPPs that are bad behaved. Yes, there are some that are dangerous, like John Warboys, etc. But many IPPs who are detained, you know, up to a decade over tariff now, many of them have exemplary prison disciplinary records, but they still can't get out of prison. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's,
totally agree with that.
You know, so if you take us back to so he's had you know these number of knockbacks. Were they transferring him around from prison to prison to prison? Because I know they were doing that with a lot of IPPs, and that's very disruptive for family. Or was did he stay in one prison? Did he do any courses or anything like that?
He did courses, and they'd move him. Then they'd do other courses. Then they'd move him again. The first few years were sort of free from too much going on. But in 2010, I think he went there shortly before this in HMP, which was Camp Hill.
Yeah.
I think it's closed now. But there was a security staff that were bullying, blackmailing, threatening, and assaulting young lads.
And what prison was this?
Camp Hill on the Isle of Wight.
Camp Hill. Is that a DCAT prison?
No, I think it was probably something like a C.
CCAT,
but,
yeah.
But now I think there's only one prison on the Isle of Wight because there was two next to each other.
Yeah.
Parkhurst, which I think was for like, I don't know what, but much worse than James.
Yeah.
So he was in this Camp Hill prison. And he said to me, Mum, there's a security manager who's blackmailing us, threatening us, etc., etc., etc. So anyway, it came to a point where James rang me, said, Mum, he's blackmailing me, I'm scared, etc., etc. So I initially wrote to the prison corruption unit.
Okay.
Which basically they didn't really want to know, to be honest. So this was like, it sort of started off in the January of 2010. And because they didn't really want to know, it dragged on and on and on over the next few months. And then what happened was this security manager and his sidekick were carrying on there. They used to take James in a room and make threats to him.
Yeah.
You know, which is disgusting. But what had happened was there was a young lad, a young traveller lad, and he couldn't read or write. And James said, I'll help you contact your solicitor.
Yeah.
So anyway, one particular day, which I have got the exact date somewhere, in April. Have a look here. Yeah, it was in April of 2000. Wednesday, 21st of April, 2010. This young lad, James saw him on the landing at about 2:00, and this security manager was bullying him. And then obviously James doesn't know what he said to him, but he walked past James and James said, "Don't worry, we'll get hold of your solicitor." And at 5:00 that day, he was found hung in a cell.
Wow.
And what happened was, because I was already making this complaint, I'd already spoken to the governor, who actually was quite a decent man. He said, "I can't believe what you're telling me." And I said, "Seriously?" And then after, this lad, so they were aware of it, but hadn't done anything yet, this lad hung himself. So the governor contacted me. Oh, no, someone's knocking the door now. Hold on. Won't interrupt this yet.
That's all right. In your own time, it's fine.
So I just got to do this call. Okay, fine.
Tell him you're live on Crime and Justice TV.
I have to fill out something because I have no car at the moment. Okay. And that is a bit of a problem. But I'm sure he'll go off quietly, but I just wanted to warn you. Oh, don't worry. No, but I do. No. I remember the old lady that was here before you. Yeah, he's all right. Don't worry. I think he's stopped now, but I thought, I apologise, but it's going to be difficult for me until I replace him. Yeah, don't worry, he's fine. It doesn't bother me, honestly. Well, that's fine. As I say, he's been out, he's fine, I gave him a few biscuits. Oh. But the thing is, he adores my daughter. Oh. And so I have to get out before she arrives. Oh, right. Yeah, no, he's fine, don't worry. Okay, bye. Bye. Sorry.
That's all right, that's all right.
Telling me her dog's probably going to bark. She's just going to leave him. I thought he fucking barks every day.
Oh, bless
but
him.
it doesn't bother me. Sorry, can you cut that bit out, though?
Yeah, I can edit that out. Don't worry, Mandy. Yeah, it's fine.
Right, so basically, this lad hung himself, and then it got a bit more serious. It was handed to the governor to do an inquiry.
Right.
Investigate, whatever they call it. So anyway, James made a statement to give to the coroner, which basically he was the last person to speak to this Nathan.
Right.
So anyway, then they moved James to Winchester.
Winchester Prison, yeah?
Yeah, so they could carry out this inquiry, in brackets, you know what I mean? So anyway, what happened was James was left in Winchester. The only good thing was this officer was moved to the other jail in the Isle of Wight because it was true what he was doing. So anyway, that was that. But he said to James, "I will make sure you stay in prison." Right, and believe me, he kind of has in a backward way. I mean, but so that was that, and then since then, every time he's got a parole, all this fake security information comes up. Like not proven, not charged, no nothing. And then the parole board get jittery, so they don't want to release you. And even the probation was saying, "Oh, he must have done something." I said, "Oh, for God's sake, no! If he's done something, I tell you. If he hasn't done anything and it's just fake, there's no substance to it, it's just crazy." And then, so it's followed him around, basically.
Yeah.
And then last year, he was in a prison called Highdown in Surrey, which was not an area he should have been. He'd had his life threatened by someone. But whilst he was waiting to go to court in like May 2017, he got slashed with a razor in HMP Lewis.
Right.
So then they moved him to this HMP Highdown. But it just kind of continued. And then the dog handler, it is there now at Highdown. He's the sidekick of the blackmailing security manager.
Mm.
He would say to James, "Oh, Thingy says hello," but James just blatantly ignored him. Basically, that's all he did. But so basically, that kind of followed him and stopped most of his parole being released. You know, so someone's working in the background. But he was in Guy's Marsh prison until 2 weeks ago. For some reason, they said, "Oh, you're going right to another prison." James had done nothing wrong.
So what you've spoke about there, Mandy, it's a harrowing story in the sense, and it raises a couple of issues. It's a harrowing story in the sense that your son he's already dealing with the massive complexities mentally, psychologically, of IPP imprisonment. He's constantly being disrupted by being moved around and with the goalposts being moved, from prison to prison, from course to course. And then at the same time, through no fault of his own, he's ended up in a prison where there is a security prison officer who is blackmailing people, and he's up to no good. Now, this death has happened, which has resulted in an inquiry, and James, your son, has made a statement that someone's ended up dead and hung themselves. The officer's been moved, James has been moved, but what happened at the time is that James has been told by the prison officer involved that I'm going to make sure that I make you stay in prison. Yeah. Now. Yeah. The issue this raises, Mandy, is regarding inquiries and complaints within the prison estate in modern 21st Britain. Now, an organisation can arguably be only as effective as its complaints procedure. If an organisation such as the prison service, the probation service, the Ministry of Justice, the parole board, if these organisations don't have effective complaints procedures and effective avenues and channels and measures to implement fair, accurate inquiries, especially when there's serious incidents happen, like prisoners hanging themselves, then I would argue that these organisations can't adhere to their mission statement. If they don't have successful effective complaints procedures, then how can they uphold their mission statement? How can they improve things in their organisations? How can they prevent future deaths? How can they adhere and uphold the principles of their organisation? Now, what happens is, and I know this from personal experience, so I've pursued complaints from the Comp 1 procedure on the prison landings. I've pursued complaints with the National Probation Service up to high levels in the Ministry of Justice, down in the Dorset area with ACOs, SPOs, so senior probation officers, chief probation officers, regional probation officers. I've pursued complaints with the parole board to former chief of the parole board, Nick Hardwick. Nick Hardwick didn't even respond to my complaints. Now, every avenue that I pursued with my complaints, I just hit a brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. Now, the consequence of this is that my complaints were either shredded, not responded to, or if they were responded to, they never responded in the correct and proper time frames that is in any kind of legislation or policies. It always dragged on and on and on and on. And then they would never kind of deal with the specific content of my complaints. They would just kind of just cover up what had happened. And now the consequences of this, Mandy, are twofold, in the sense that it breeds corruption in the prison estate, and it also empowers abusers to the point where there'll be a kind of arrogance within these organisations, or in the case of your son on the landing, where you'll have officers saying what he said to your son, which is, "I'll make sure you stay in prison," because that prison officer knows that there's no accountability and that he can get away with this. When I was abused in Aylesbury Young Offenders Institution, the officers would say to me, put a complaint in, and they would just laugh at me because they knew that even if I did put a complaint in, it wouldn't be followed up, or it would just be shredded. So I understand, what your son is going through, in the sense that this has followed him. It's always going to come up in security files. It's likely that the prison officer will have friends, and the prison is a small world. The prison estate is a small world, and so it's a difficult situation that your son's in, where this is following him and it keeps coming up on parole and stuff like that. But that's where a good solicitor, should be dealing with this prior to a parole hearing and on the parole hearing. What is your son's legal situation at the moment, Mandy? Has he got a good solicitor? Are they challenging any of this stuff?
Yeah, he's a good solicitor, to be fair.
Is this the SL5 one, isn't it? Is it SL5?
Yeah.
Or was that someone else? No,
yeah.
It was you, yeah, SL5. Yeah, they're a good. That's Andrew Sperling in that, isn't it?
Yeah, because he had Andrew first, but then when he was moved to Guy's Marsh, Andrew introduced him to Ian, I think it's Cloudlu or something, his name. But he's got like 30 years experience, parole boards, all sorts.
Yeah.
James feels quite okay with them, definitely. Yeah, he's quite confident about them.
Yeah.
Because, at the end of the day, not many people listen to solicitors either, do they?
No, it's difficult. It's difficult, because of the bureaucracy, and for solicitors, they're always waiting for the Ministry of Justice and the PPCS and the parole board to send the correct documents. They're always waiting for the probation service to kind of, pull their finger out of their arses and do what they're supposed to be doing when they're supposed to be doing it. The whole thing is very frustrating. I'm going to take you back to some earlier comments you made, Mandy, about how it's been difficult, and I know from personal experience of meeting other IPP family members firsthand, family members of IPPs who've unfortunately and very sadly killed themselves due to this sickening and utterly indefensible and barbaric IPP prison sentence. How are you, and how is your health, and how we spoke about James. How are you, and how is your health, and how are you coping? Because I know James will be the first thing you think of when you wake up in the morning, and I know he will be the last thing you think about when you go to sleep. I've seen your tweets on Twitter, and how are you, and how's your health, and how are you coping with
affected
everything?
My health over the last sort of 10 years.
Yeah.
I was a diabetic, but just on diet. I now have like insulin, 3 lots of tablets. Mm-hmm. I've got nerve damage to my hands and feet, and so all sorts. And like 15 years ago, I had nothing wrong with me.
No.
But steadily over the years, I think the worry, the stress, just obviously was like getting to me. You're not noticing. But yes, I think it has affected me because I feel it's so unfair, and my health to suffer because of people who don't make the best decisions in the ministry.
Yeah, it's sad. It's sad for me to hear that. How this has kind of worn you down physically over such a long period. Because this is one of the kind of spectacularly sad and cruel things about this IPP sentence. There is no other sentence in modern criminal justice history, in Britain, in the UK, and arguably on the continent, which just seems to punish physically, psychologically, and mentally the family members of the IPP in the way that the IPP sentence does. I mean, the sentence kind of made my mother ill as well. She's been recently diagnosed as diabetic. It wore her down. She used to get very upset where, it's just something with this IPP sentence. When your son gets that 2-year parole board knocked back under his door again for the 3rd, the 4th, the 5th time, that impacts you just as much as it does your son, in the sense of the hopelessness, the despair, the fear that he will never ever get out, the confusion with it all. You know, how are they getting away with it? How are they doing this? The unfairness, the injustice, and you're dealing with all of these intense emotions, which are very powerful and can just impact you. I was speaking to the father of Wayne Bell, Carl, recently, and you know, he was saying that, you know, he's carrying his son's pain with him every day into work, and it's affecting his ability to do his job properly, you know?
Yeah, definitely. Because I was medically retired 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not like a pension age. It's just that I just couldn't cope.
You couldn't cope.
I just couldn't cope. Couldn't go to work anymore, so I was medically retired.
Medically retired, yeah.
Yeah, so it does affect the family members. You know, it's just very hard for a family to deal with that, and especially when my mother died, and then my stepfather died, and like James never saw them again. So it was quite sad. I think it was quite sad. But, you know, I understand people die. That's the way it goes. But I just feel a bit sad that he was like, had no more contact with them. You know, so it does affect the family too. Not, you know, a prisoner's not just a number, they're a person, they're human.
And this is, yeah, absolutely, I agree. They're human beings, and this is a challenge that me personally in my activism, I'm struggling with, in the sense that, you know, I'm finding it extremely difficult to communicate to the wider society and the mass public that these IPPs are actually people, they're human beings with families. And, you know, the mainstream media, particularly The Sun and the Daily Mail, and other media outlets as well, but they have been frighteningly successful over the past few years in, it seems like, convincing the entire of society that these IPPs are the most monstrous, despicable, violent predators, you know, who, if released, could at any time go on a mass killing spree. You know, and you and I both know that's not the truth. I mean, the Attorney General, Jeremy Wright QC, only this month, Mandy, in the Owen James's Inside Time prison newspaper, he made a very public statement regarding the story of Wayne Bell, saying that IPP sentences were given out for the worst offences, for the worst dangerous offenders. Now, you and I both know that is fake news, and it's not true, because the worst offenders convicted of the worst crimes, who are the most dangerous people in society, are not short tariff IPPs with 8-month tariffs like your son. Those people are all locked up in high secure category A dispersal prisons like Whitemore, Franklin, Full, Sutton and Wakefield, doing 30+ year mandatory minimum life sentences, you know?
Yeah.
And that's what they've done. They've demonized the entire population. And even recently, when Mark White on Sky News reported on the IPP sentence in conjunction with Jordan Milne of Sky News, you know, they reported on, you know, the injustice of the IPP sentence, but then they put a picture of John Warboys on the news article.
Yeah, but isn't he a murderer?
No, he's a serial sex rapist who has raped over 100 women. There was 86 offences that the Crown Prosecution Service were aware of, but when he was sentenced to IPP with an 8-year tariff years ago, the Crown Prosecution Service only pursued 19 offences, and one was of rape, and the other 18 were sexual assaults and drugging offences. But he was the black cab rapist who was going around London, you know, raping women. And the CPS basically fucked up and didn't pursue enough of the charges to put him away, you know, for enough time where he'd never see the light of day again. And then after 8 years, a parole board somehow instructed that he should be released, or that is the story that they're telling us. A lot of other people, and then there was the public outcry resulting in the sacking of Nick Hardwick, the former chief of the parole board, and then there was the crowdfund campaign for judicial review to keep John Warboys in custody and not have him released. And then subsequently last week he's been charged with a number of those old cold rape cases, which should hopefully put him away now, where he won't be coming out for a very, very, very long time, if ever. But a lot of people have kind of read between the lines, Mandy, and believe that John Warboys, never really had genuinely, sincerely, had the decision to release, and that a lot of people believe that this was kind of done by design to kind of deflect away from the injustice of the sentence. Because when this John Warboys saga happened in 2017, the momentum against the injustice of the sentence was so fierce. I mean, it was building up so much that it kind of felt in the criminal justice circles that something might be done to get this necessary retrospective legislation passed in order to give these short-term IPP some hope. And then all of a sudden, John Warboys hijacked the momentum. And when I used to ring up the Howard League and speak to the lead campaigners and the Penal Reform Trust, Peter Dawson's organisation, I'd say, what's going on? I'd ring them up every week from prison and say, what's going on with IPP? And they'd just be all defeatist, saying, John Warboys has hijacked, the momentum against the injustice of IPPs. And now, currently, what happens is every time any media broadcasting organisation reports on IPPs, they always blast a picture of John Warboys, a serial rapist, as kind of like the poster boy for IPPs, and then they say, to demonise the entire of the current 2,500 IPP population, me and your son included, and Wayne Bell and James Ward, and it's just disgusting, and it's very deceitful, very dishonest, and it's done to deflect away from the mammoth injustice of the sentence. It's done for the Tories to continue to maintain their power in Parliament without having to address this biggest and worst mass miscarriage of justice of the modern 21st century anywhere on the continent. I mean, that's how big and bad it is. I mean, it is horrendous. The level of suffering, the number of people that are suffering, the death toll, which is now both higher than that of Grenfell Tower and Hillsborough. And it's not just the death toll, Mandy, it's the manner in which these people are dying. When I left HMP Winchester 8 months ago, I was a Samaritan's listener and I was seeing IPPs. 4 of them got sectioned to high secure hospitals because they were suffering catastrophic delirium and mental health breakdown. And many, many short tariff IPPs in HMP Winchester, they were skinny, grey, gaunt, 10 years over tariff. They were covered in self-harm scars. They were carving chunks out of their faces, their genitals, their legs. They were in isolation units, locked up 23 and a half hours a day. They were screaming into the night, just suffering delirium. And 30-year prison officer veterans would walk in the cell with me and would try and, calm them down and talk to them. And then we'd walk out the cell and the officer who's been around for 30 years in these prisons would just put his head in his hands and sit in the chair, because these officers have never, ever seen this scale of human suffering. And I think you would struggle anywhere on the, especially in Western Europe, to find a level of suffering inflicted in this barbarous manner upon men and women in the 21st century. Because, for example, even in Russia's toughest prison, Black Dolphin, which houses the worst serial killers in the entire of Russia, in Vladimir Putin's Black Dolphin, the right to life is protected, Mandy, because every 15 minutes there's an officer at their door making sure they don't kill themselves.
Wow.
Yeah.
Hey, it's wrong for people to suffer. I worked in mental health for years, and to watch people suffer that are just suffering,
yeah,
is is awful, but to suffer when you're like, you don't know what day or year you're going to come out of prison is even worse. Because they go in without mental health issues and they end up with mental health issues.
So if you've worked in that field, what do you think? What in your opinion would be the impact on? Because this is something that's not talked about, and an issue that I'd like to raise. You know, these prison officers, it must be affecting their marriages. You know, I used to watch them. They all were worn down. They're all doing overtime. And some of them were fantastic, Mandy. Like, I can't even knock them. Some of them kept me alive at times. Officers in HMP Winchester who would help me and come and sit in my cell and talk to me and just try and help me when I was suicidal and I was putting razors to my throat and I just wanted to die because I saw no hope. You know, and not just prison officers, like chaplains, education staff, if they're watching these men, these IPP suffering in this manner, what do you think would be the impact on them? You know, they've got to take that home with them, haven't they?
I think it must impact on the staff, because I will be fair, most prison officers are very, very good.
Yeah.
It's only the few rotten ones.
Absolutely.
Who like to bully, like to inflict more misery onto the IPPs. You know, so they're watching that as well. They're watching prisoners suffer, and they're also watching colleagues causing problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you imagine they go home and think, oh my God, you know, so I think it does affect a lot more than the public are aware of.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. Yeah, I mean, they've got to take that stuff home. And like you said, what you said's very apt there, Mandy, how, you know, they're watching the you know, this just despicable level of human suffering, absolutely outrageous, and they're seeing, you know, a small minority of prison officers, their colleagues, you know, like you said, not the majority, but the minority, you know,
it is minority.
Kind of, you know, inflict further abuse on some of the most vulnerable people in society, you know, and then they're going away with that kind of moral conflict, you know. Yeah,
I do think there's a lot more to it, you know, and the ones who are doing it should really be accountable.
Yeah, and like we touched on earlier, there's no accountability, is there, Mandy?
No, there's none, because they cover up for each other. And then sometimes want to speak out, but most of the times they're too scared to speak out.
Yeah, if they lose their jobs,
they'll
be ostracised by their colleagues. And I think that's a good point, because modern thinkers, modern penal reformers, and, you know, up and coming aspiring academics, even grassroots politicians who might even be at school now, you know, I would hope that they can be inspired by what you've just said there, and in the sense that, you know, modern prisons need to have procedures and policies in place where accountability is there, and there are policies and procedures and complaints measures in place for people to pursue these, and for these complaints to be investigated thoroughly. You know, because without that, you know, when we hear about abuse inflicted by prison officers, like when Zahid Mubarak and Feltham, when they were officers were betting on his on Gladiator School, Colosseum, putting prisoners together and then betting on the outcome, and that led to the racist murder of Zahid Mubarak. Anytime we hear about abuse like this, or you know, abuse in schools, or, you know, other places, hospitals, mental health places, a lot of private mental health institutions are in the news currently. We always hear people say, you know, this narrative that you know, there's good and bad in everyone. But from my perspective, you know, that might or might not be true, Mandy, but any organisation which has a duty of care to the most vulnerable people in society, abuse is wrong, and people should be held accountable, and there should be no place for it. And anybody who chooses to disregard that and can and then proceed to abuse the most vulnerable people in society should feel the full force of the consequences and the law.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's not happening at the minute, unfortunately, is it?
No, sadly, no. Because you make a complaint about a prison, which I'd not long done, a few months ago, but I had some very, very serious issues.
Yeah.
And one was my son was on a suicide watch.
Yeah.
He wasn't eating, wasn't drinking, he was on a hunger strike. And one of them had falsely put that he was seen drinking. But, that could have had dire consequences on James's health, or he could have died.
Yeah.
But that comment, they've just brushed it aside in the complaint. It means nothing. So I have sent it on higher up because I'm not happy with the answers, I should say. So it's just, you just can't win against the prison system. It's just you complain and then it gets thrown back in your face. No, we didn't do anything wrong. No, it's always, no, not us.
And how just on that point, what you said there is very important. How, if you could just tell everybody, all the listeners, how does it feel? Because I know that you've been fighting for your son for years and years and years, and you've pursued complaints, and rightly so at times, you're pursuing these complaints. How does it feel to be ignored, Mandy, when you're fighting for your son, and to not feel valued, that your complaint and that your grievances are not being acknowledged and valued? How does that feel as a person and as a mother?
I feel sad that my complaints are not really acknowledged, and I also feel sad whatever staff were on that block at the time and saw my son suffering didn't give a damn. They didn't care about my son. He was found unconscious one morning because he'd had no food or drink for days.
Yeah.
And they just left him.
So,
wouldn't you take someone to a medical centre?
So it's like an overwhelming feeling of sadness, and perhaps...
I feel very sad, and at times it feels like my son's never going to have a normal life again. He's probably just going to die in prison. That's how it feels, because of the last couple of years of what's happened to him has been horrific. Horrific assaults. No one gets punished for them.
No.
Nothing. Nothing. It's just, I feel saddened by people who choose that profession and who don't give a damn about anybody.
Wow, that's powerful. No. Yeah. So it's an overwhelming feeling of sadness, a deep, deep sadness. You've got hopelessness there, despair, like you mentioned. That your son could possibly die in prison, where the hope is just being eroded over time. They're not listening to the complaints. You feel ignored, and then you said you feel saddened that people have chosen that profession. But they don't care. I mean, I think that's a very, very important point.
I think that some of them, obviously the minority, have chosen it because they can bully and boss people around.
Right.
I mean, we had ones like it in the mental health hospital, certain nurses. And I was thinking, oh, shut up. I wouldn't put up with none of their behaviour. I told them straight.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they did something wrong, they knew I'd tell. Because I don't like injustice, but certainly not to someone who's mentally ill or a prisoner or, patient in a hospital. It's not right. You don't need... If people in this world were kinder to each other, what a different world it would be.
Wow.
But they're not.
Yeah.
Sadistic, nasty bullies who lie their way through the prison service are still employed by the prison service. Even though we had him moved from Camp Hill, he still is in the prison service.
I think on that point, you're talking about people being kinder. I think it's very. Yeah. I think it's very interesting, Mandy. I think that in these institutions, which are notoriously kind of dark, hidden away places that nobody talks about, these young offenders institutions, these prisons, hospitals, mental health institutions. I think one of the critical skills for professionals in these establishments, and I hope new up-and-coming professionals going into these organisations, many of which that I talk to at the moment on my various social media platforms, speaking to a couple of criminology students up in Newcastle recently, and they're hoping to go into probation. But yeah, I hope all those people will take on board this point. I think one of the critical skills is the ability to live your life, your professional life, in 24-hour blocks. And what I mean by that is when you leave work at whatever time it is to leave everything at work and not hold grudges the next day. So, for example, and not take yesterday into the next day. So when I was working, I'd done some voluntary work a few years ago at like a kids hostel. They were 13 to 17. They weren't bad kids. They just started getting into trouble with the police. So I'd take them out shopping, get them CDs, get them food and stuff like that. And I would paint their rooms, Mandy, and then they would smash their rooms up and like draw on the walls and smash the chairs up. But when I used to go back the following Tuesday, I would just paint the room again and get a new chair and put a new chair in there, and then I would do the same again the next week and the same again the next week. I wouldn't hold grudges against them. Do you know what I mean?
No. It's just habits they've learned, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
so you need to reinforce your side, and then in the end, eventually, they will think, oh, he does care about us, or he this, or she, you know.
Wow.
So
That's interesting. Yeah.
Because it's like behaviours, like in mental health, obviously, certain behaviours, when I knew they actually knew what they were doing, I told them it's unacceptable and I wouldn't work with them at that moment in that behaviour. You know, and then it can stop because they think, oh, it don't really bother her. You know, but I just would not put up with bad behaviour.
Yeah.
But there are certain ones, obviously, that never were badly behaved. They were just so genuinely unwell.
Mm-hmm.
And I sometimes spent a whole shift with them, with the one person.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, you do get staff that are bullying and this and that. But I say to them straight, don't do it in front of me. But if I find out, I will tell on you. And it's not being a grass, it's just being respectful of other human beings.
Yeah, that respect, and that unconditional positive regard for other people. And
James,
if you can't do that, and you can't practice that unconditional positive regard, and you can't let things go, and you can't come in the next day, you know, with a fresh brain. You know, then you should be stacking shelves in Tesco's, really, shouldn't you? And there's nothing wrong with working in Tesco's, but you get my point, yeah. Yeah,
definitely. But, you know, I think the prison, like, whole thing about the prison is so ingrained in, oh, no, we'll get him out of this. He won't get in trouble.
Yeah, it's a culture. It's a culture. And that's Barack Obama says it, the former president of the United States of America. He says you can change the manager or the leader 50 times, but you have to change the institution if you want to change the culture. Yeah, and that's you know, there's always the exception to the rule. That's not to say a new leader can't come in and just, you know, totally change the culture, but it's very, very, very difficult. And that point, Mandy, is very, very important. And I'm glad you mentioned it because, you know, it's very important for me, you know, as an activist and on Crime and Justice TV to kind of play the long game. You know, there's no quick fixes. So one of my missions is to inspire the next generation of prison officers, probation officers, practitioners, you know, mental health practitioners, prison governors, etc., police officers, you know, who won't respond to a murder like they did with Stephen Lawrence and then refuse to give him mouth to mouth because they assume that he's a drug dealer or a criminal because of the colour of his skin. You know, my mission is to inspire the next generation, but the next generation of all of the above mentioned people are going into institutions that have endemic, entrenched, diseased cultures of abusing children in young offenders institutions, of institutional racism in, the canteen culture in the London Met Police, of corruption and abuse and no accountability in the prison service. So it's very difficult, isn't it, Mandy?
Yeah, because at the end of the day, whatever complaint you make, James was in the prison when he was younger, and these officers came in and said they were taking him to the block. He said, "Oh, I'm not going to the block, I haven't done anything."
Yeah.
So they dragged him down there, 2 knelt on him, and they just beat the crap out of him.
Mm.
And the prison denied any wrongdoing. But when I visited him, he was covered in marks all over his face and neck. So what, did he do it himself?
Yeah.
So they deny anything. You know, I think that's what's worn me down, is nobody wants to take accountability for their colleagues who could be corrupt or could be a bully. You know, at the end of the day, you're just allowing it, aren't you? You're allowing that behaviour by just letting them get away with it.
Well, yeah, if you're observing it and not doing anything, even if you weren't a direct perpetrator, then you're complicit and therefore arguably equally as guilty, aren't you?
Yeah, well, yeah, I think they are equally as guilty.
So on that on that point, what we'll do right now, we'll make a plea. I've done this recently on a Feltham video that I did. So if there's any prison staff, probation staff, education staff, any staff working in the prison estate right now, or mental health institutions that are listening to this podcast, if any of them are witnessing abuse, then Mandy and I on this broadcast are encouraging you to do something about it. Even if you do it anonymously, put a note in a box or something, or you can contact BBC Panorama anonymously. If you go onto their website, you don't have to put your name. Just do something about it. Don't ignore abuse. Because you're prioritising and safeguarding that monthly salary, which you need it to pay your bills, pay your mortgage, and feed your children and stuff. But you can expose this stuff anonymously.
Yeah, I think it should be exposed. See, I wouldn't have no qualms about. Well, I'd tell them to their face, I'm going to expose you, but it's wrong.
Yeah.
It's just making somebody suffer needlessly when they shouldn't. They're in prison to be punished, yeah.
Yeah.
They got sent to prison to be punished, but you should be not looking up for 24 hours a day, not put somebody in the block because they got a cat to keep them safe.
Yeah.
My son's been there over 2 weeks now in the block to keep him safe.
And he's in Coldenley, isn't he?
Yeah, and the priority should have been to move him because he was viciously attacked.
Yeah.
By 5-6 people, stamped on his head, smashed a cup in his face, broke his nose, stamped all over him. Absolutely disgusting. And what they're trying to say now is there's no CCTV on that wing. Convenient.
Yeah, very convenient.
Yeah, but my son could have died being smashed on the head with cans and
100%.
It stamped on. And I rang the prison. I asked them to take my son to A&E for an X-ray, and they said no. The healthcare deal with it. And I said, but they're nurses, they're not X-ray machines. They refused. They wouldn't take him. And what they gave him was a paracetamol.
Yeah, that's what they
It's a bloody
do.
insult. It's an insult. Do you know what I mean? My son went to that jail. He told them he would be attacked. He was at risk. Sorry, he was at risk of being attacked.
Yeah.
Normal procedure, as you probably know, when you go to any new jail, you go on an induction wing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the induction wing was bypassed. James was just put on a wing. And then he was there about 4 hours, and they ran in his cell and just battered him. They're not accountable for their disgusting attack, but my son's suffering in the block because it's the only way they can keep him safe.
Yeah.
And James should not be there. Each day he rings, he sounds more and more down.
Does he?
Every day. And then he said to me today he'd asked to go to this certain other jail, which they apparently were going to take him to. But he was told today by an officer that a staff member who must be recently worked at Guy's Marsh was going to this jail, and he's put a block on him coming there because he said he was disruptive, which is absolute, utter lies. He respected anyone in Guy's Marsh. He didn't cause them any bother at all. And so this man is saying, no, I've blocked him. He's not coming to this prison. An officer said he's going to look into it, but, at the end of the day, what the hell is going on? Do they just want my son to die or attack him? I don't really get it. I don't get it at all, Pepsi. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's horrendous. This stuff from...
If he was kicking off, if he was abusive, swearing at the staff and disrespecting them, I might understand a little bit. Yeah. But he does none of those things. He just does none of them.
Yeah, it's that ongoing thing of just constantly not being acknowledged or ignored or having your concerns, valued in any way, shape or form by anybody. It's always like, oh yeah, put a complaint in, and then even if you do
that's all they say to you.
Yeah. They don't even get back to you.
I complained to Guy's Marsh. I did get a email today from the governor's secretary asking for James to do a disclose, so it can be disclosed to me, any information.
Yeah.
So he's going to do that. But then I put a complaint in where he is now, and a complaint at Highdown, which has unfortunately had to go to the ombudsman. But you can't win against them.
Nah, it takes 18 months with the ombudsman. It's ridiculous.
Very, very difficult, and it makes me sad that my son is struggling, because normally he's really upbeat, he's a nice lad, he's kind, he's polite, he's not an angel, he's not perfect.
No, and you've never said that. You've never said that he is, Mandy. You've never said that.
No, he never was perfect, but he's he'd hold his hand up. If he's done it, so be it. And I think that's why he's got so down, because he's done nothing wrong to have been moved from Guy's Marsh. But to go there 4 hours later, be viciously attacked. Something doesn't ring true, but I can't actually give the names. Someone in Guy's Marsh is linked to somebody in Coldinley. And they were involved in the investigation in 2010 at Camp Hill. So it always comes back to bite you, doesn't it?
Yeah.
See, no one needs to tell me it's not corrupt. I know it is. As soon as James said the name, I thought, oh no, it's his mate. But the two who did the investigation, I thought, you couldn't be that unlucky, could you really? But so it just seems funny. He was moved to a prison in Surrey, like Coldinley, when he's from nowhere near Surrey. And life was at risk in Surrey in Highdown, which is why he's moved.
Yeah.
So, they move him back to a sister prison, because Highdown and Coldinley, I don't know what you call them, not a sister. They're together.
Yeah.
So it just seems funny. That's where they sent him. And then that happens to James. But can you imagine how you'd feel? Your nose is broke, your face is smashed in, all your head's been stamped on, and you're offered a bloody paracetamol. It's a proper... It's just... You couldn't make any of it up, really, could you? But it's true. It's happening. Mm-hmm. And if it was someone else's, son or daughter, they might worry about it. But because it's not their son...
That's absolutely true, yeah. Yeah,
no
until it
one
happens
cares.
to them, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't want to have a phone call to say, I'm really sorry, your son's in intensive care or your son's committed suicide. I don't want that.
Yeah, it's a fear. It's a constant fear, isn't it, Mandy?
I'm struggling against it at the moment, do you know what I mean? I think I really just can't see my son getting old, and that's awful.
I think on that point, what we'll do, if we bring things back to the here and now, If we
Yeah.
try and bring things back to the here and now, for James and for you, and what I mean by that is, I know it's very difficult to do, possibly impossible, but we've got all this stuff from the past. It's something that's been going on for such a long period, which is such a big proportion of your life and James's life, all through his 20s, subject to this IPP sentence. But if we try and this is how to help James. If we try and, for want of a better phrase, try and erase everything from the past. Yeah, yesterday is gone. It's history. Yeah, tomorrow's not here yet, so we can't worry about that yet. So if we focus on the here and now, so taking it back to you, I mean, I can't, for 1 minute even, try and attempt to kind of school you on, how to be a mother. I think you're a fantastic mother. I think James is very lucky to have you. A lot of mums have suffered so much due to this IPP sentence that they've become extremely ill physically and psychologically. You're still here, you're still fighting, you still got a smile on your face. So what I would say to you, Mandy, is keep things very simple. And what I mean by that is the secret to success is self-love. So your priority every day is to look after Mandy, practice self-love, eat well, sleep well. I know it's difficult, but eat well, sleep well, watch your favorite TV, see your friends, walk, see the neighbor with their dog, have a bath, take care of yourself, and keep things very simple and look after Mandy. If you need to see the doctor, you see the doctor. If you need to take your diabetic medication, take that. Look after Mandy. Practice self-love at all times. Yeah, especially when
I do.
Especially when you're feeling the most sadness and the most pain, because that is when you need to do it the most. And if you do that, then when James needs you, then you can be the best version of Mandy for James when James needs his mum. Yeah. So that would be the first thing I would say. Now, with regards to James, in keeping it in the here and now, it's virtually impossible for him to do that because he is locked up. He's constantly in his own mind. He is addicted to thinking. He is battling to just survive day to day with all of this stuff going on, all of the pain, the despair, the hopelessness, all of these incredibly difficult emotions in such a chaotic and extreme environment under such conditions of frustration and injustice. Yeah, so it's difficult for him to do it, but he needs to keep it in the here and now, in the sense of he needs to forget about the past. He needs to focus on the here and now. And what I mean by this is to have hope, Mandy. Yeah, I believe your son will be released. I don't believe he will die in prison. And the reason I personally believe that with the utmost sincerity is because we have to have hope, and we have to have faith that your son will come home. He's still young. He's got his whole life ahead of him. He can and will come out and rebuild his life and have a happy and successful life. We have to hold on to this hope. Yeah. So that what it's a case of getting prepared for his parole hearing. When's his parole?
Well, the probation today told me his upcoming parole won't be affected by his being moved, because James thinks it will. She's told me today, no, it won't. She's doing the report shortly.
Yeah.
In a couple of weeks, so she's going to call me. But the funny thing is, you're saying about like positive. It's usually James, until the last couple of months, it's usually James who teaches me and my daughter about positive thinking.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, that's inspiring.
What's that book? You probably heard of it. The Secret.
Yeah, Louise Hay, isn't it? The Laws of Attraction. Fantastic book.
Yeah, James knows every word in the whole book.
Yeah.
And he tried to teach me in at least like laws of attraction, positive thinking. But, that's why it's hard to hear him like he is at the moment, because it's not my son. It's not him. He's gone through so much over the years, but has stayed and kept his head above it all the time.
Yeah. So to say that to him, when you speak to him on the phone, or when you write to him, or when you see him, that's what you say to him, Mandy. You say to him, that he's an inspiration. He's a champion of life. He inspires even you, his own mother. Keep the faith. Stay positive. We will get through this. We're going to keep fighting. You are going to come home, and practice some of that stuff yourself. You know, that laws of attraction, Louise Hay stuff is powerful. You know, when you're in the shower or the bath, or you're walking a dog or doing a washing up, you know, visualize James walking through the gate and coming home. Visualize it. Attract that, reality into your life. Our thoughts create our reality is true. You know, we are what we think. You know, if I'm thinking negative all the time, he's never going to get out, you know, then I will create that in my outward life. So that's why I visualize and I think positive. James Lawrence is coming home. He will get his parole. He is coming out. You know, visualize that happening, and just attract that towards you. So so this is where your focus needs to be. James's focus. James needs to focus on these reports. He needs to focus on seeing the probation officer and being the best version of James when he sees them to do the reports. Focus on the parole hearing. Focus on his legal visits with SL5. The psychologist report. If they're going to get done, he needs to plan for his future, you know, whether it's writing it down or thinking about, you know, what he wants to do. I was speaking to, I went to visit Danny Weatherson, IPP in Northumberland recently. He was telling me that when he comes out, you know, he wants to help kids, he wants to be a mentor, he wants to do some drug practitioner work, you know, start thinking about this and tell that to probation, you know, tell probation about, your hopes and your dreams and what I want to do in the future. You know, this is powerful stuff, and this is the kind of stuff, you know, he needs to be thinking about and telling the parole board. So if we wrap it up, what we'll do, I'll put your Twitter link in the description. I'll put the Laws of Attraction Louise Hay link in the description. What was the other thing I was going to do?
When he was in an open jail for a while, he was a sports mentor.
Oh, wow.
To
Okay,
young lads who were at risk of going to prison.
Yeah.
And he was brilliant. It was at Portsmouth Football Club. It's not on anymore.
I don't doubt that for a second. I think I know the name of that. Is that what's it called? The mentoring thing. It's done there down on the south coast. Yeah, I'm familiar with the program, but the name has slipped my tongue. No, I don't doubt it for a second that he was good at it.
He was a superb footballer, an athlete when he was younger. Superb. Which is why I think he done the personal training exams. He's got all his exams, so he can personal train you. Mm-hmm. But he tries to do it to me, to his sister. It's so funny. She goes, "I can't. I'm worn out."
Yeah.
But you know, he's strong, very, very strong, and he's about 6'4", but he's very.
Yeah, I've seen a photo of him. Yeah, he looks well. I think it was a family visit. The photo I saw. He looked well. He looked well. I mean, and this is the stuff to hold on to. You know, he's got his whole life ahead of him. He's still young.
Yeah.
And the sky's the limit. You know, he can coach kids. He can get into. He can be a personal trainer. He can coach a football team. You know, there's so much, ahead of him. Yeah. And this is what he's got to hold on to. He cannot give up hope, because if we give up hope and we quit, then we die. You know, this is the reality, and they're dragging IPPs out of there, zipped up in body bags and throwing them in vans like a piece of meat, and then covering it up, and then not even contacting the family, until the person's in the morgue. They don't even contact the family for days or weeks later. You know, this is the reality. It is kind of do or die. James has to take care of himself, because no one in HMP Colonelly will take care of James for him. The prisons can't even help themselves. You know, the priority for every prison governor in the 124 prisons in England and Wales at this moment in May 2019, when the number one governor comes to work every Monday morning, is don't get it twisted. Their priority is not to do everything they can to uphold the prison service mission statement, which is to detain those sent by the courts, to treat them with dignity and respect, and to help them lead law-abiding lives. Their priority every Monday morning and those 124 prisons is, have I got enough prison staff to prevent a riot leading to major loss of life, a serious disturbance, or the murder of a prison officer? You know, it's not to safeguard life. You know, IPPs will die in prison and be left to die, as will other vulnerable prisoners, and they'll just get carted out of there with like a piece of meat. That is the reality. And like you said about the healthcare, the healthcare staff and stuff, you know, the healthcare is very poor, and if you become ill in there, you can die in there as well, and that's happening all the time. I've seen guys in there with brain tumours, seen people going blind, just horrendous, you know, and you will not get to a hospital unless your arm's hanging off, you know.
No, because they took James's medication off him. In one prison, he suffered a back injury from something they told him to lift, and there was no health and safety given.
Yeah.
So his disc has come out of his spine a bit. So he's had like CT scans, consultants, all this business, and he was given pregabalin for the nerve pain.
Yeah, pregabs.
Yeah, last couple of years, prison said no, not having them. And they, in one prison in Highdown, they gave him 3 different mental health drugs. And he said, Mum, because I was hallucinating and everything. But I said, don't touch them again.
Yeah, good advice.
But why would you give 3 different sort of mental, like depression, mental health drugs to somebody who's got a bad back? Crazy.
What we'll do, what we'll do as well, we'll put James's details in the description. If anyone wants to write to him or contact him via email at prisoner.com, I'll put that link in the
do you want it? If you've got his prison number?
No, if you give it to me now, then I can put it into the description. What is it?
It's A63.
A63.
7. Oh no, hold on. Yeah, A63. 7. Oh my God. Hold on 2 seconds.
That's all right. No rush.
I normally know it.
Yeah, sometimes your mind just goes blank. Yeah.
Yeah, well, often. Right.
Mine too. Yeah, mine too.
Right, where did I put it? Have a look. Where did you keep it written down somewhere?
Well, what we'll do, we'll put all these links. We'll put the Twitter, the Louise Hay. We'll put James's details. So if anyone out there is listening who's into, you know, sports, personal training, coaching or anything like that, and can offer James, my mind went blank there. If anybody can offer James, anybody in those kind of fields, any ex-offenders or anybody, you know, not just in the UK, around the world, you know, people who haven't been to prison but are involved in these kind of sporting, mentoring things, if anybody's listening who can help James and give him some hope, then you'll be able to contact James in the details that I put into the description.
It was the one I was going to tell you. It's A639.
A639.
7AA.
7AA. And so I'll put the link for email at prisoner.com, and I'll also put the address. But I know he might get moved, but he's in Coldingley at the minute, yeah?
At the moment, yeah.
Okay, and if he gets moved, I'll put Coldingley address down. But if he gets moved, I'll just let me know, and then I'll update that straight away.
Yeah.
So that just leaves me, Mandy, to just thank you for sharing what is a gift. I mean, you've given me a gift in what you've shared with me. So I want to, you know, share in feelings and personal stuff and about your struggle, your plight. So thank you for that gift. I want to acknowledge that and thank you for that gift, for sharing that with me and for my subscribers. I've got subscribers all over the world, Canada, America, China, Thailand, Finland, Australia, Sydney, so thank you for sharing your story with me and all my subscribers. Please send my kindest and warmest and best regards to your son James. I will continue to help you on a personal level. You've got my phone number. You've got me on WhatsApp. Anything I can do for you and James, that help, that offer of help is not just a one-off thing. It's an ongoing thing. I will continue to help you and your son in any way that I can, as you continue to struggle with this, with the consequences of this IPP sentence. So yeah, I just want to say thanks.
No, thank you very much.
You're more than
For
welcome.
thank you for your support and sort of help. Do you know what I mean? And it'll get better. I know that.
Fantastic. Cheers. Thanks a lot, Mandy. Thanks a lot.
Oh, I'll speak to you really soon.
I'll speak to you very, very soon. Yeah, the pleasure was all mine.
Right,
All the best.
Bye.
All the best.